The United States had kept their pledge to their dead president and become the first nation to land humans on the surface of the moon. Their only competition had been the Soviet Union. They too had the political will and technical capability to perform such an operation, but it seems that fate, more than poor planning or workmanship, was in the end the contributing factor to their failure. The Soviets had indeed circled a Zond capsule around the moon and back, but a series of launch vehicle failures stalled their efforts. The US too had had their technical failures and tragic losses, but they stayed the course, diligent and focused. The Apollo 11 lunar landing vehicle, call-signed Eagle, flown by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, set down on the lunar surface July 20th, 1969.
30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little. 20. Down a half. 30 seconds. Forward. Just. Good. Okay. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
The Eagle remained on the lunar surface for a little over 21.5 hours.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Armstrong and Aldrin walked on the moon for a mere 2 hours, 36 minutes and 40 seconds. In that time, they collected 21.55 kilograms of moon rock and soil samples, planted an American flag, set up scientific packages, and spoke to the President of the United States, Richard Nixon. Their operational timetable had to be adjusted from time to time due to unexpected delays. Armstrong had trouble squeezing through the LEM's hatch, and the surface dust slowed their locomotion, coating everything in a fine layer of powder. Their documented collection of samples had to be cut in half, and a 15-minute time extension was granted to finalize their objectives. They returned to the Eagle, stored their collection of samples, jettisoned equipment they had finished with, including their lunar backpacks, a camera, and overgarments. Aldrin also left a small pouch of memorial items on the surface. It contained a message disc, a gold palm leaf, and an Apollo 1 mission patch in memory of their 3 dead comrades. The crew then rested for 7 hours before beginning their ascent. One item to be dealt with was repairing a broken circuit breaker switch, accidentally snapped off by Aldrin. With engineering ingenuity, Aldrin used the cap from a ballpoint pen to depress and hold the button, enabling them to fire the main ascent engine.
Beautiful. Very smooth. Very quiet ride. There's that one crater on there.
Thousand feet high, 80 feet per second vertical rise.
Unfortunately, the astronauts had planted the American flag too close to the LEM, and it was blown over by the rocket exhaust. Later missions would plant their flags much further away. The Eagle's upper stage lifted off and returned the men to orbit with ease. There, they chased down Michael Collins in the command module Columbia, and in a slow-motion ballet docked, transferred their valuable cargo of specimens, and jettisoned the Eagle. With a main engine burn, the Intrepid 3 were on their way home. The Apollo 11 command capsule splashed down in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, some 380 kilometers south of Johnson Atoll, and was picked up by the USS Hornet an hour later. President Nixon was there to greet them in person. The unfamiliar visiting of another world required special quarantine procedures in case the astronauts had brought back with them unknown pathogens or microbes. a possible danger to the entire planet. The astronauts donned special isolation suits and were doused with potent chemicals as they exited the command module bobbing in the ocean. After a short helicopter flight to the carrier, they were ushered into a transportable isolation chamber. They were kept under strict quarantine as they were transported back to the United States and the Lunar Receiving Laboratory in Houston. Finally, after receiving the all clear, the three astronauts were released on the 13th of August to a mind-bending shower of praise from the American public. In Los Angeles, a state dinner was held with representatives from 83 nations, where the three astronauts were awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. This kicked off a 45-day world tour beginning in Mexico City. The so-called Giant Leap tour took the three men to 25 countries, including France and the United Kingdom. Many nations released commemorative postage stamps, awarded civilian medals, and wined and dined the great explorers, although at times they seemed more bewildered than bold. In St. Louis, at the 27th World Science Fiction Convention, the three men were awarded the Hugo Award for the best moon landing ever. The accolades and ticker tape parades continued incessantly. At a joint session of Congress in Washington, D.C., the three astronauts presented two flags, one to the Senate and one to Congress. Both had been carried to the moon and back. None of the three astronauts would fly in space again. Buzz Aldrin would resign from NASA in 1972 and return to the Air Force in a managerial role. He suffered from depression and alcoholism, but turned his life around with his third marriage and continues to promote manned space flight. Michael Collins became involved in the administration of the Air and Space Museum, then later the Smithsonian, before moving into private business in the aerospace industry. Armstrong was assigned an administrative position within NASA, but resigned in 1971. He pursued his first love, engineering, as a teacher in aeronautical engineering in various universities. He also served on the boards of directors of several companies and was also a company spokesman for some. Armstrong would be called upon by NASA in later years to lend his engineering qualifications and experience to two accident investigations. 1969, and America was in the throes of an all-consuming and unpopular war in Asia. The people, and in particular the US government, were glad of the space program and its headline distractions. Unfortunately, it was short-lived. The mountain had been climbed, the goal achieved, but even at this heady peak, the decline in public interest would be a steep and rapid one. The superpowers' challenge in space had seemed to swamp any other nation's efforts in space exploration. Although the Soviets launched the first satellite, the Sputnik, in 1957, and the US Explorer 1 in 1958, other nations had been working towards their own launch vehicles and satellite designs. Canada launched their Alouette 1 satellite on the 29th September 1962 aboard an American Thor Agena B rocket from Vandenberg Air Force Base. France became the third independent nation to successfully launch their Astérix satellite aboard their own Diamant rocket from Algeria on 26 November 1965. Soon after, utilizing a small US sounding rocket, the Scout B, Italy launched their first satellite, San Marco 2, from the San Marco platform off the coast of Kenya. Australia had developed the Woomera rocket range on home territory and successfully launched a borrowed US Redstone rocket to put their RESAT into orbit 29 November 1967. The United Kingdom developed their Black Arrow ballistic missile at Woomera as well and successfully launched their Prospero X-3 satellite 28 October 1971. Earlier, in April of 1970, the People's Republic of China fired their Long March rocket from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center, placing their Dongfang Hong-1 satellite. One nation that began space rocket research as early as 1955 was Japan. The University of Tokyo's Institute of Industrial Science, or ISAS, first launched pencil rockets in Kokobuni, Tokyo. At the same time, the NAL was formed. The National Aerospace Laboratory was attached to the Prime Minister's department. Later, the Akita Rocket Testing Center was established at Michikawa Beach in the prefecture of Akita. There, pencil and baby rockets were extensively test-launched. Germany had von Braun, America Goddard, and Russia Korolyov. Japan had Professor Hideo Itokawa. Post-World War II, Japan was a clean slate for rocket research. Any previous research and development had been either destroyed by the designers for fear of war crimes or disallowed by the Allied powers. Itokawa, as a young child, witnessed an American aircraft performing aerobatics. This triggered a lifelong interest in flight, and he proceeded to ensconce himself in aeronautical engineering and aircraft design. After the war, Japan was banned from any weapons research, and Itokawa turned to acoustic and medical engineering research in the US, where he came across a book on space medicine. He returned to Japan, enthusiastic to start serious research into practical space flight. And practical he was, enlisting the aid of both university and industry. June 1958, and a K-6 two-stage Kappa rocket achieved an altitude of 60 kilometers. In July, 2 years later, a modified K-81 reached 190 kilometers altitude and made ion density measurements. By December 1961, an altitude of over 300 kilometers was reached. Once again, onboard detectors recorded electron density and temperatures. 1964, and Japan launched their first weather observation satellite, the MT-1351. By 1967, an L-3H-3 rocket achieved an altitude of 2,150 kilometers. In 1969, the NASDA was formed, with its headquarters at the Tanegashima Space Center, absorbing other research branches and tracking stations. 11th February 1970 saw Japan join the small but growing club of space-capable nations. The Osumi satellite achieved a successful orbit. With Japan's burgeoning electronics industry and a growing economy, it would become a key player in later unmanned space projects. The second moon mission was Apollo 12. Astronauts Commander Charles Conrad Jr., Command Module Pilot Richard Gordon Jr., and Lunar Module Pilot Alan Bean launched in November 1969 during a rainstorm. 36 seconds into their flight, Apollo 12 was hit by a bolt of lightning, which momentarily disrupted electronics, communications, and telemetry. When the link with ground control was re-established, the rocket's telemetry was garbled and unusable. An abort of the mission was imminent. However, one mission controller recalled an obscure procedure and suggested to astronaut Alan Bean to try SCE to AUX, an obscure switch on a secondary backup panel. Almost no one had any idea what its function was. However, Bean did, and it fixed the problem, rescuing the mission from certain failure. Their journey to the Ocean of Storms continued uneventfully. Obtaining lunar orbit, the lunar module undocked and descended towards the surface. Where Apollo 11 had been a tense, nail-biting event, the second lunar descent was somewhat more laid back.
That's it, there's LPD.
Roger, copy P-64.
1,000 update. Hey, there it is. There it is. Son of a gun, right down the middle of the road. Outstanding, 42 degrees, Pete. Coming down at 2, Pete. You got plenty of gas, dude. Hang in there.
30 seconds.
18 feet, coming down at 2. He's got it made. Come on in there. 24 feet. Contact light.
Roger, copy contact.
Rock. Pro. Yeah, pro. Okay. Inform off. Okay. On cycling bound, you got your spinning command override off. Yep.
The craft landed short of their designated landing site, called Pete's Parking Lot by Conrad. However, it was another successful soft landing.
Landing, Pete. Outstanding.
The descent down the Lem ladder had a different feel as well, when Conrad, who was considerably shorter in stature than Armstrong, referred to Armstrong's famous first words.
And that may have been a small one for Neil, but that's a long one for me.
This mission had planned a longer stay on the surface, 31.5 hours in total, with 2 EVAs lasting a total of 7 hours 45 minutes. To improve televised picture quality, NASA had this time provided a higher resolution color TV camera for surface operations. However, Bean, who was setting the camera up near the Intrepid lander, inadvertently pointed the camera straight at the sun, instantly destroying the video tube in the camera. There remains little TV coverage of surface operations. The Ocean of Storms was a popular landing site for previous probes, Luna 5, Surveyor 3 and Ranger 7. Intrepid had purposely landed close to Surveyor 3, in fact within walking distance. The 2 astronauts reached and inspected the Surveyor probe, which had landed in April 1967. They removed some samples, including the video camera, from the probe. It was here that one of several pranks was to be enacted. Alan Bean had smuggled a camera self-timer device on board the flight, his intention to attach it to their surface camera and take a shot of both astronauts at the Surveyor site, leaving ground crews to wonder who took the photo. Unfortunately, he misplaced the device prior to EVA. Another prank was somewhat more successful and was played against Bean and Conrad. The backup crew had inserted additional pages to the astronauts' operations checklist they had attached to their wrists on the lunar surface. There were several Playboy pin-ups and additional geological jargon to confuse ground crews. A childish prank at best, but it did show that the Apollo project was losing some of its gloss. Back on Earth, there were even complaints to TV networks when regular broadcasts were interrupted to show the live launch of Apollo 12. Fame is often short-lived. Apollo 12 completed all its assigned goals, placed several experiment packages on the moon, and collected specimens weighing over 34 kilos. Before leaving the moon, Bean left behind the flight wings of astronaut Clifton Williams, who had died in training. He also left behind several rolls of exposed film by accident. Perhaps his wrist checklist had something to do with that. Yankee Clipper splashed down November 24, 800 kilometers east of Samoa. Incidentally, on landing, a film camera stowed on board dislodged and struck Bean on the head, momentarily knocking him out. He required 6 stitches. The third manned lunar mission, Apollo 13, lifted off April 11, 1970. There had been a last-minute crew reassignment due to a German measles scare, and backup crew member Jack Swigert was made command module pilot. The flight was commanded by veteran Jim Lovell, and lunar module pilot was Fred Hayes. The first phase of the mission went off with only a minor hitch. The center engine, one of 5 of the second stage, shut down prematurely.
We're go, flight looks good here.
This was later found to be a pogo oscillation problem that was very serious, and design changes were made to later flights. The remaining 4 engines were burnt for a longer time to compensate for the power loss. The command module, codesign Odyssey, and the lunar lander, Aquarius, began their 3-day coast towards the moon. The media frenzy of the earlier flights was absent. In fact, the networks chose not to interrupt regular programming for the usually live, televised show from the space capsule by the astronauts en route. The late-night shift change was about to occur at the command center as the crew settled down for a rest period.
13, we've got one more item for you when you get a chance. We'd like it to stir up your cryo tanks. In addition, I have Shaft and Trunnion for a look at the Comet Bennett if you need it.
They were 321,000 kilometers from Earth.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.